In 1887, 1 year before Saint John Bosco's death, he had his second vision of the pains of hell. Much like the first, God made him go through this dreadful experience so that we may be assured not only of hell's existence, but of how many unfortunate souls end up there. We should thank God for his mercy in warning us through this dream of Saint John Bosco. And speaking of God's mercy, I would also like to relate a miraculous conversion story which took place in Don Bosco's Church of Mary Help of Christians. This second story is appropriate for children, but as to the first, I'll leave it up to the parents' discretion. The Miracles and Prophecies of Saint John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Matthew Miller. Subscribe for new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don Bosco's great confidant, Father John Lemoyne, used to sit with him in the evenings to ease the unavoidable idleness of solitude in his old age. He couldn't read too much anymore, for the candlelight hurt his eyes. The saint was 72 years old. During one of these evenings, Don Bosco made a prediction. Without anything having been said in reference to such a topic, he remarked completely out of the blue, "You'll live to a ripe old age." Another evening, as Father Lemoyne was silently trailing him upstairs, Don Bosco suddenly halted, and as if he were revealing a secret, whispered, "A very glorious future awaits you." Then, after a brief pause, he continued, "What you have suffered is nothing in comparison to what you will have to suffer. But be brave. Everything has an end in this world. And then comes paradise." Father Lemoyne lived to be 77. His good memory endures and will endure in the Salesian congregation, and his name echoes also outside the congregation on the lips of many people, especially for what he wrote about Don Bosco. Keep in mind, Father Lemoyne is the author of Don Bosco's Biographical Memoirs, on which this YouTube channel is based. But the last period of Father Lemoyne's life was really troubled by physical infirmities, and even more by spiritual anguish coming from various causes. Now and then, Don Bosco would relate the dreams he had had during the night to the younger secretaries who were usually around him. On the evening of February 13th, this is what he told Father Violetti, who recorded his words in his diary. "I want to write down many important things which were revealed to me in a dream at the beginning of the year. I always mean to do it, but then I forget. See that you remind me of it. I will turn them over to you so that you can record them." But perhaps in order to save him the painful effort of writing, Father Violetti did not remind him. Not infrequently, when dreaming, he would cry out loudly and would wake up Father Violetti, frightening him so much that he would run in from the adjoining room. On the morning of April 3rd, he told Father Violetti that he had been unable to sleep the night before because he'd been thinking over a frightful dream which occurred on the night of the 2nd. All of this had thoroughly exhausted him. "If the boys were to hear the story of what I saw," he said, "they would either give themselves to a life of holiness or they would run away in terror so as not to hear how the dream ended. Besides, it's impossible for me to describe it all, just as it would be difficult to draw a genuine picture of the punishments in store for sinners in the hereafter." He had seen the pains of hell. First he heard a terrible noise, like the noise of an earthquake. Then and there he didn't give any great attention to it, but the noise gradually grew louder until he heard a long, drawn-out and terrifying rumble, mixed with screams of terror and agony, inarticulate human voices which mingled with the general din to produce a horrifying uproar. He looked around him apprehensively to try to find the cause of such a pandemonium, but he couldn't discover anything. The ever more deafening noise was getting closer, but it was no longer possible for either eyes or ears to discern what was happening. Don Bosco went on with his description. "At first I saw something like a mass, a shapeless, voluminous something which gradually shaped into a gigantic barrel of fabulous proportions. The painful cries were coming from it. Terrified, I asked what it might be, and what could be the meaning of what I was seeing. Then the screams, which until that moment had been inarticulate, grew louder and more distinct, so that I made out these words, 'Multae gloriantur in terris et cremantur in igne.' Many will be glorified on earth and be burnt by fire." Then I saw inside that kind of barrel some people with indescribable deformities. Their eyes were coming out of their sockets. Their ears, almost torn away from their heads, were hanging down. Their arms and legs were dislocated in a ghastly manner. Intermingled with the human screams were the strident meowing of cats, the rabid barking of dogs, and the roaring of lions, the howling of wolves, and the snarls of tigers, bears, and other animals. I looked closer, and among those unfortunate people I recognized some. Then, even more frightened, I asked again what such an unusual spectacle could mean. I was given this answer: Gemitibus inenarribilibus famem patientur ut canes. With inexpressible groanings, they will be as hungry as dogs. Meanwhile, as the racket increased, his perception of things also grew clearer and more vivid. He was better able to recognize those unhappy souls. He heard more clearly their cries. He felt more oppressively his own terror. He yelled out some questions. Will there be any remedy for or escape from such a disaster? Is such an array of horror, such a tremendous punishment set for us? What must I do? Yes, a voice answered him. There is a remedy, but only one: to hasten to pay one's debts with gold and silver. But these are material things? No, aurum et tus, gold and incense. Unceasing prayer and frequent communion will provide a remedy for such an evil. During this dialogue, the more anguished were the shrieks heard, the more monstrous were the appearances of those who shrieked, so that, frightened to death, Don Bosco woke up. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, but it was impossible for him to go back to sleep. As he told the story, he was trembling all over his body. He was hardly breathing and in tears. Now I would like to relate a triumph of God's mercy that occurred several years before, through the intercession of Our Lady Help of Christians. Don Bosco had built a magnificent church in her honor, and sometimes random people would stroll in to admire its beauty. Father Rua's chronicle relates, "Today a man came to visit the Church of Mary Help of Christians. Indifferently, he walked around, observing everything. Stopping at the main altar, he paused to contemplate Our Lady's painting, and then continued his rounds till he reached the main entrance. Then he turned around and slowly walked up the main altar through the center aisle. At that hour, the church was completely empty. He seemed to have been drawn there by a mysterious, gentle force. As he stood under the dome, he spotted a slip of paper that had accidentally dropped from some boy's prayer book. The church had been swept that very morning, but the sacristan had missed that scrap. After looking around, the man bent down and picked it up. It read, "On such and such a day in December, one of your companions died. He was the same age as you are. What would befall your soul if death should surprise you? What would your fate be if right now you had to face God's tribunal? Would you be eternally happy in paradise or eternally damned in hell?" The man was stunned. His sorely troubled conscience stirred up within him a violent conflict that he vainly tried to suppress. Mary's voice prevailed. He slipped the note into his wallet and walked into the sacristy. Distraught and disheveled, he looked terribly upset. He turned to the sacristan, but in his great emotion couldn't utter a word. Finally, after pacing up and down, he asked for a priest, fell to his knees, and made his confession. Afterward, radiant with joy, he took out the note and showed it to the confessor. "Can you recognize the handwriting?" he asked. "Yes, a very fine boy wrote it," the priest responded. In other words, one of the saintly boys of the oratory. "Well, tell this boy to rejoice, because Mary availed herself of this note to save a soul. I'm a lawyer and have not gone to the sacraments for the past 20 years. I promise, though, that from now on I shall live as a good Christian. Tell that boy that I wish I could thank him on my knees for the good he has done for me, and that I shall keep his note as long as I live in memory of Mary's mercy." If you'd like to hear other stories about the many saintly boys of Don Bosco's oratory, just click on the link above me here. If you'd like to hear about Don Bosco's first vision of hell, click over here. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.